So today I know we're going to talk about your personal journey, relationships, and how you became successful and how you're going to inspire others. So why don't we just start right from the beginning?
Okay.
Describe your personal journey and exactly what happened during it.
So the journey starts back in Cape Town, South Africa, where I grew up. And I grew up in the time of apartheid. So there was the segregation in the country around race, obviously entrenched in the laws of South Africa. So in, the very, I suppose, 1 minute summary of apartheid was that the country was segregated into the black population, the colored population, which is what I am, because I have mixed, I'm a biracial woman, white grandparents and black grandparents, and then whites. And was how the country was set up, how the country had laws around segregation. So basically kept the races separate. You couldn't go, like I couldn't go into a white neighborhood, couldn't get on trains that were for whites, couldn't go to beaches that were for whites, and so on. And that was the same for black people. Um, so the journey starts with knowing from a young age that, well, this is what my father told me. He said, you're going to have to work twice as hard. You're going to have to work really hard at school because your opportunities in this country is going to be limited. All the best jobs, all the opportunities were pretty much for the white people, some opportunities for colored people, and even less opportunities for the black people. So blacks were segregated into what they call townships in South Africa. Many of them were, I would say corrugated iron shacks put together, loads and loads of people in one spot, and extreme poverty. So that's how the country was set up. So dad told me from a very young age, he was like, you're going to have to work. You're a female, a biracial female. So that has got a couple of things stacked against you. And that means you're going to have to put in effort. You're going to have to get good grades. So I knew from very young that I couldn't muck about, right? I had to get serious about my schooling. And he also told me, he said, if you want to go on to tertiary education, like into university, you're going to have to figure that one out because your mom and I can't afford to send you to university. So there were all these things already put on the path. And I suppose when you're told that young, one of the things I remember about myself is I was a very serious child. And sometimes I look back on that time and think, I wish I had more freedom. I wish I had been more humorous, more funny. But I remember taking life on as a very serious child and working really hard. Um, I eventually, graduated high school, and my high school was under very trying circumstances. The last year of high school, all the colored schools were closed down because there was rioting, there was protesting, there was, people were starting to fight back against the government. There was a lot of tear gassing, killing of people, police opening up fire, and just people dying on the streets. And so the schools were closed. And yet, despite the schools being closed, we were told we still had to sit the final exam. Um, and that was very trying. What ended up happening was that some of our teachers arranged for us to come to their homes to learn and study, but all of it we had to sneak around. Put it that way, we had to sneak around. Nobody could get caught going into, because a lot of the teachers back then were white teachers, so they were inviting us into their neighborhoods to come and sneak into their homes to study and learn. A lot of clandestine activity going on around that whole time. And so I sat the exam in a military base because it wasn't safe. So they had us go into these meeting points. Buses would pick us up, take us to the military base, and that's where we wrote our final exam, surrounded by guns and soldiers and God knows what else. Very, very awkward time, very difficult time. Got through that and applied for a scholarship to go to university, which I got. And so I did my first year of university at the University of Cape Town, which came with its own challenges, right? Because that was a prestigious university. very few Black people went to that university, and those of us who did go went on scholarships. So it was largely a white university. And that, I suppose, is where I encountered my very first confronting racism from white adult people. Because I grew up in my own colored community. I knew what was going on in the country, but we were largely in our colored community. We were protected. We lived insular lives, I would say. But suddenly we're going to university and we're exposed, you know. So that was a challenge. I do remember wanting to leave university because I was very unhappy, because I felt incredibly isolated. It didn't take long for me to figure out that I needed to keep my mouth shut, because there was a lot of sneers and sniggers when I answered questions. If I raised my hand, if the lecturer asked the question and I answered, you got the sneers and the sniggers from the white population. And I was like, you know what, I'm not putting myself in that position. So I suppose you could say the first time my voice was really shut down, because I just stopped talking. I was like, I'm just going to be quiet like a little mouse in the corner, take my notes, go to my lectures, and sit my exams. But we migrated to Australia in my second year of university. And so I gave up that scholarship, migrated with the family to Australia, to Melbourne, Australia. And that was a different experience. It took a while to get used to Australia, probably 2 years, I would say, the family took to settle down. And that was because the country was so different. And we had been programmed to think a certain way. Because one of the things I remember was I was only in the country about 2 weeks or something. And my cousins had been living in the country for about 5 years before us. And we were going into the city, and I said to my cousin, I said, which train do I get on? And she said, you're not in South Africa anymore. You can get on any train. And so that's an indication of how one can become indoctrinated in your thought when you've lived a certain life for such a long time that you don't even realize, I'm not in South Africa anymore. I can go wherever I want. No one's going to stop me. No one's going to jail me. Nobody's going to arrest me or anything like that. So that was part of the reason it took us probably 2 years to adjust to the country, because we were still carrying some of the thought processes and the wounds and the fear and the worry from South Africa. And then, you know, I finished university, entered a relationship. That was good for 5 years, I would say. We were together almost 10 years. And then it was bad. There was domestic violence in that relationship. Finally I left the relationship when I was 4 months pregnant. He had an affair. He got angry like I had an affair. It was him. It was just, I caught him, put it that way. He got caught. He didn't like it. The violence ensued, and I almost lost the baby. Ended up in hospital, came out of hospital, and then left the relationship. And so I basically started my new life with a baby in my belly. I was 4 months pregnant at the time. And I was about to go on maternity leave. So there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear, because I was like, how am I going to feed this baby? How am I going to start over? My income is going to stop. But I did find a way. And I suppose that goes down to resilience and to, you know, prepared by my life experiences in South Africa, by adjusting to life in Australia. All of these little things had, I suppose, set me up. Now, I won't say it was easy, because it wasn't. I was incredibly afraid. There were lots of tears, but then I did book myself into some counseling. As just before my baby was born, I was seeing a counselor, because I knew that I needed to sort my messed up emotions out, right? I was broken by that relationship. I lost everything. I had worked 2 or 3 jobs to get the house that I got. And when we broke up, the house sold at a loss. He walked away from everything, including the debt. So it all fell on my shoulders. So it was a very challenging time. But I knew that I needed to sort my head out. So I went to an expert. You know, and this is, I suppose, a message for the audience, is that sometimes we can't figure it out on our own. Sometimes you need to go to someone for help. Don't be too prideful to not seek help when you need it. And I needed help. I needed someone to help me get a hold of my emotions, the despair that I felt, the fear that I had. And so I went to see a counselor. And that was really one of the turning points in my life. So that was the journey up until, and there's obviously a lot more, but I just want to see if there's anything you want to ask me, you know?
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because I know, like, for me, I've read about what happened in South Africa, but I didn't live it, nor did I know anyone that did. So you sharing that is incredible for a number of reasons. And the first reason is because you have someone who is telling you a moment in time that maybe we didn't experience it, but because of the way it's shared, it takes you there. And you're like, okay, I can see how maybe me with my personality type would adjust or try to live life similar to you as you're going through it. So I guess my question then, because you partially answered it, is your experiences from South Africa and from Australia up until you got pregnant, how much of that was you saying that, okay, I'm pregnant, I need to figure this out despite what I've gone through because I want to make sure that not only is my life healthy, but the life of the child I'm bringing into this world.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was so what I often say, and my daughter always smiles now when I say it, but I often say that my child saved me because I was pregnant. I'd gone through this breakup. I'd also been through lots of difficult times from the time in South Africa to, adjusting to Australia. And one of the things I knew, because I found out, I intuitively had this feeling I was going to have a girl. But then when I was going through that time where I almost lost the baby, they were taking scans and things, and the sonographer said to me, I can see the sex. Do you want to know what it is? And I said, I think it's a girl. And she says, yes, it is a girl. So I knew I was bringing a daughter into the world. And I don't know, there was a resolve in me. From the moment I found out I was bringing a daughter into the world, there was a resolve in me that said, I'm going to give this girl a good life. And one of the ways I'm going to give her a good life is that I'm going to make my life good, because I needed to be an example to her. Because, sometimes we have parents or people around us, they tell us what to do, but they don't live it. And I knew from me growing up and watching my parents, I always watched my parents and how they were. And so I was like, no, I need to be an example to my daughter as well. So I can't just say I want to create a good life and then not have a good life. I actually have to make sure that that's happening for me and for her. And so once I gave birth to her, I became incredibly resolved to give her a better life. And that was the start of me starting to look for better opportunities. And it actually led to my side business, which is now my full-time business, because I sat down, I did the numbers, and I was like, man, there's this $50,000 debt. There's this newborn baby, and I'm not earning enough money, right? I did all my numbers, and I'm like, I'm not earning enough money. What do I do? So I calculated, I'm like, I need to earn $20,000 more a year. How am I going to do that? And I didn't know how to do that. But what I did do was I sat down and I said, okay, who can help me with that? Who can help me figure out how to get 20 grand more a year? And the first thing that came to mind was the people that make the decisions, the people that give people jobs. So I was like, well, that's recruiters, or that's hiring people in companies. And so what I did was I started to take these people out for coffee. I would save my little dollars, the little money I could save, I would save it. I would have enough money for, say, 3 coffees that week. I would reach out to a recruiter or reach out to a hiring person and would ask them out for coffee and say, can I have some questions? And most people, I think if you really ask people with sincerity and genuineness and authenticity, people will respond to you. And I was very upfront. I said, I need to learn a few things and I would like to pick your brain. And I think most people like people to pick their brain. We all like to share knowledge with other people. So most of them, I would say 90% of the recruiters or the hiring people I asked out for coffee said yes. And I asked them questions. And they told me specifically what I needed to do with my resume, what I needed to do to get better, how I needed to prepare for interviews, all this type of thing they shared with me. And I did that and eventually landed the opportunity. And the opportunity that I landed that gave me the next level with income increased my income by $50,000. And that shocked me because I was going for 20. So I more than doubled my target income. But what happened was that people around me, my family, my colleagues, friends, they knew the rock bottom that I'd hit. They knew I'd lost everything. And then 8 months later, they see me in this job that's paying me this really good money. And I'm starting to pay down all my debt, and that people started to come to me for help. And that's actually how my career coaching business was born, because I started to help people with the same strategies I had used to land my good job. But yeah, at the end of the day, at the bottom line of that story example that I just shared was that it was my daughter motivating me to have and create a better life. I did not want her to be a victim of life. I did not want her to know some of the struggle that I had known. Now, I knew that she would probably face her own challenges. None of us go through life without challenge. But I was like, I'm going to give her a really good start. And that's what happened. It was driven by past struggles, but also a desire for future success. Those were the two motivating factors that took me down the road I went.
So now, Wendy, when you look back on how far you've come and now you're helping other people to achieve some of the success that you did, what are some of the obstacles that you see them struggle with, which may remind you of what you struggled with back then?
So one of the things that I struggled with, and I see everyone who comes to me struggle with, is confidence, right? When you've been battered by life, whether it's an abusive relationship like mine was, or infidelity and your relationship ends, or you're now stepping into single parenthood, when you've been battered by life, it does dent your confidence. That is for sure. I think anybody who says it doesn't is a liar, right? so, so I'm just going to be upfront and put that on the table. Sometimes it's not necessary life. Sometimes you've been in a job for a long time and you're not getting opportunities, you're being overlooked. You could even have a terrible boss who belittles you, that can dent confidence. So whenever people come to me, and it was the same for me when I started out, the confidence was definitely missing. So one of the things that I started to look at was, what am I good at? Like, what are the things, can I name 3 or 5 things that I know I'm good at? And then, which of those 3 or 5 things do I really like to do? Is there one thing that in particular that I really like to do? Or are there 2 things, maybe 3 things? And then the third piece is, how can I start to shape up and frame up these skills that I have, that I'm good at, that I really love doing, and actually create a transferable skills list that could potentially go and help others. I can use in any industry, for example. So for me, if I use myself an example, I was very good with the written word. I was from the time I was a child. That was actually how I processed all that difficult times living in South Africa. I used to write about it. I wrote poetry about it. I wrote short stories about it. So the written word helped me, and I became very good at the written word. Written communication in particular, is one of my strengths. So I was like, I really love writing. I'm really good at writing. And then I looked at the jobs that I'd done earlier, and I was like, every time I'm in a company, somehow my bosses always give me the written stuff to do. If it's a PowerPoint presentation, whether it's emails. I've had a couple of bosses who were from other countries and struggled with the English language. They always used to let me write their communications because they knew I had this way with words. I was like, I like doing this. And then the other thing I identified was that I was always in places where I wanted to help people. So when I was a kid, I was working with disabled children. Then I worked in homeless shelters. So I was like, okay, there's another thread through my life. And this is where you start to build the confidence in yourself. When you start to look at what you're skilled at and what you're good at and where you've contributed something. And that's the piece I always say to people. When you're struggling, go and take a little trip down your own memory lane and start to identify the good skills, the skills that you love, and where you've contributed, because eventually you're going to be able to identify a pattern about the direction that you should be heading in, right? And when we start to head in the right direction and we get little wins, it builds confidence even more. And so, the best thing you can do to rebuild your confidence, if you feel like you've been battered by life, is to take a look at the achievements and the wins and the great skills that you have, and work on that slowly. And I always say to people, do things step by step. Like, don't overwhelm yourself with, oh my goodness, I need to get out of this job, so I've got to do, this 10 things. You'll never get it done. It's one little action at a time. Ask yourself this question. I asked myself that question back then when I was really struggling and worried and full of fear. What is the next best action I can take right now? And for me, the next best action I could take at that time was, I need to talk to the recruiters, to the hiring people that know how to help me. That was the next best. Then after I did that whole bit of research piece and spoke to these people, the next best action was, I have to rewrite my resume. Then once I rewrote my resume, the next best action was, I need to practice my interviews. I need to practice with someone on how to interview strong, keep my answers tight, all these things. So I never did all of my steps at once. I did them one by one by one, because if you try and do everything at once, you usually end up overwhelmed, which means you don't do it effectively, which means you fail. And when you fail, it just dents your confidence even more. So for me, it's like piece by piece, just take the one next best action. That's it. Right?
I love that, right? Because I look back like on what I struggled with, and I wasn't confident that I was going to be successful. And by successful, I mean by the way I define it. Because maybe you went through this, Wendy, where as you're growing and you begin to maybe form the identity that you want, then some people will tell you, okay, this is what success looks like. Big house,
Yes.
big car, lots of money, hot husband, hot wife, fancy clothes, right? All
Yes,
these
right.
things. So when I looked at it and I was like, okay, I grew up poor. I don't have a good relationship with my mother or my father. So I started to see these obstacles in front of me, these hurdles that I have to overcome, right? And then one day I was like, similar to you, I was like, okay, if I really want this, how am I going to go about it? Why don't I ask the people who are already successful?
Yeah.
Right. So I did very similar to you, just in a different lane of life, right? And in a different area. So as I began to speak to these people similar to you, they're very friendly, very insightful. And I sat back and I looked back and I asked this and I was like, why isn't everyone doing this? Because so many people are willing to share this wisdom, share this knowledge. Even though I may have been hesitant, I asked myself the question, either I don't do it and I struggle, or I do it. It might be uncomfortable in the beginning, but what's the worst they can tell me is no. But some people may say yes. How did you find the courage to then ask these people, take that knowledge, apply to what you're doing now, and then share it with others?
So for me, first of all, I was absolutely grateful that people took the time, that when I invited them for coffee, that most of them said yes. So that was it. So, gratitude is really important. And I always made sure I thanked the people for their time. Because what you don't want to do in life is take people for granted and just expect that they're supposed to give to you. They don't have to give to you. They didn't have to sit down with me and have a coffee with me. One of the greatest ways you can honor someone who helps you is to actually apply the knowledge that they share. So a lot of people ask for help, people share their knowledge, but then they don't do it. They don't apply the knowledge. Now, when you don't apply knowledge that's been shared with you, you're going to find yourself still stuck in the same place 6 months later, a year later. Knowledge is only power when it is applied. It is not power when it is gained. Someone's shared, say, I share with you something that I know, or you share with me something, and then I sit on my bottom and never apply what you've shared with me. Well, 2 months later, 6 months later, we talk again. I wouldn't have moved further because I've done nothing with that knowledge. You gave me knowledge and I've just let it sit there. So you do have to apply the knowledge. When you ask for help, if someone gives you their top tips on how to succeed in a career space, or top tips on how to get healthy and fit, or, grow your finances, you need to apply it. Now, I'm not saying apply everything, because someone might give you 3 or 4 or 5 strategies. I always go back to the one next step, the next best step. What's the next best one you can do? But you have to apply the knowledge, right? And if back to you spoke a little bit there about success. Success means different things to different people, and also at different stages of life, right? So for me, then when I needed to pay down a $50,000 debt, needed to feed an infant child and establish a new home for us, success for me meant an extra $20,000. If I got that, that was success in that moment. But the other thing that success meant to me at that time was being a good, present mother to my child. And so when I went back into the workforce and I started to get these opportunities, I started to negotiate, one, for good salary, good income. The other thing I negotiated for was working partly from home. Now, this is 28 years ago when that was not a thing, right? But I said to the bosses, and sometimes you've got to have courage, right? You just got to be a little bit bold. And I said to them, I'm interviewing you as much as you interviewing me. And what's really important to me is that I need to be present and at home with my daughter for some of the time. I'm not going to have her in daycare 5 days a week. So here's my offer. And I would say, I will come into the office 1 day a week. I'll do all my meetings in the office, gather all my information, and then I would like to work from home. So I need you to give me access into the company so I can work from home. And let's trial it for 3 months. That was the thing I put on the table with them. And I said, and if it's working for you in 3 months and it's also working for me, then we've got a winning formula and we can keep going. So, and they agreed to that because that's a reasonable request, right? It's not just me demanding something. It's me saying, let's trial it for 3 months. If it doesn't work, we try a different strategy. But what I decided was that it was going to work. I was going to make it work. And so I delivered above and beyond, especially when I was working from home. I made sure that I was available on my phone all the time. I was available on my emails, and delivered above and beyond. So by the time the 3 months ended, all the evidence was there that this could be done without impacting anything. And so they just let it roll over. And I negotiated that in every single job that I worked for. I was working from home for 3 days a week, sometimes 4 days a week, long before the pandemic, long before it was even done. But here's the thing, I asked for it. And sometimes I think people forget that sometimes you just have to ask, because how do you know? People often presume that someone's going to say no to them. Just like you going to the people you went to and asking for help and guidance, and me going to the people. We just assume that the person isn't going to want to help us. And that is not the case. I've not seen that be the case. There are some, I call them douchebags. Okay, there are some douchebags in the world who are just selfish, who are never going to help another human being. Okay, that's just the way they're wired. But fundamentally, my experience has been that people will always be willing to help, especially if you're authentic, and especially if you ask it in a way that benefits both parties, right? I've
Oh,
never had people say too many no's to me.
so let me ask you then, because if I look at your situation, look at my situation, both difficult upbringings for different reasons. But then I wonder now, because I listen to the way you speak about it and similar to the way I identify with it, how much of our past played a role in us being fearless to ask for help versus some people who are, as you mentioned, right? They may assume the person going to say no. They may shy away because they don't necessarily have the courage or the fearlessness to ask. So, how much do you think our earlier experiences played in us being fearless to ask anyone and everyone, regardless of their responses to us?
Well, I think that experiences can either make or break people, right? So for some people, we go through very difficult experiences and it breaks us. It breaks our confidence. It breaks our courage, all of those things. And so we never, and then if you don't go and figure that out, then you always live a life where you hiding, where you're not stepping up for yourself. Because here's the thing, you don't have to step up for other people if you don't want to, but you need to step up for yourself. Nobody is going to step up for you, right? People don't step up for people who don't step up for themselves, because fundamentally human nature is drawn to courage, is drawn to confidence. Even when we go for job interviews and things, when you're confident in an interview, the hiring person is drawn to you. They want to help you. They want to give you. I mean, I've seen people, and I've done it myself because I hired in corporate for 23 years. So I would see people and I would see a level of confidence, but I'd see nervousness in them. I would try and help them and prompt them and get them over the line because they had that innate courage or they had that innate confidence. Not everyone has that. If life has broken you, then I think the first responsibility to yourself is to go get the help that you need to sort that out, right? If you don't get the help you need to sort that out, then you're always going to be behind the eight ball, right? And then you're not going to step forward with confidence. You're not going to actually ask for the help that you need. When you're in job interviews, you're not going to negotiate with a lot of strength. And then that's not going to elicit confidence in the people that might be ready to hire you or give you opportunity. The other way to build confidence I've seen work really well is for you to go help someone else. One of the best ways to build confidence is to go and help someone who's less fortunate than you. You'll quickly realize that your problems, whilst they might be big, are probably tiny compared to someone who's worse off than you. And when you realize that, like for me, when I was helping, and I've done a lot of volunteering in my life, working with the homeless, because I would go, you know what? Yes, I know that this is difficult. Yes, I know I've lost everything I work for, but you know what? I have my parents and I have my siblings, and I'm not out on the streets with the baby in my belly. So someone here is worse off than I am. And then suddenly there was a level of appreciation, I suppose, appreciation for the fact that whilst my circumstances were difficult, there were always some people or someone else who was worse off than me. And I think if you step into that space of appreciation and gratitude, and you counting your blessings more than you cursing what's happening to you in life, it also contributes to confidence building and to slowly building courage. I mean, it's not an easy road to go down, but we need to take little action steps towards it. And sometimes one of the big action steps could just be, or little actions, it could just be, I'm counting my blessings today. I don't like what I'm going through, but there's at least one other person worse off than me. And all we have to do is look around the world and see young kids in dire poverty, you know, to know that there's millions of people worse off than we are.
Yeah, some people struggle with putting things in perspective because they think everything that has happened to them is the worst thing possible in the world, right? But then what happens sometimes is that if they look at it and say, okay, I'm the only person that can get myself out of this. Your back is to the wall. You can only step forward. I think that's where they're going to get the courage. And you made a good point where you said that if you want to feel confident in yourself, go help someone who's less fortunate.
Mm-hmm.
Charity work will humble you in so many different ways you can't even imagine. Like, I'm really big on charity. And when I feel like complaining about something, I think about the charity work that I did. I was like, okay, Trin, is this really a complaint? Is this something that is going to
Yeah.
break your day after what you just helped someone go through? And I think that's why I work with so many charities now. And most of the people I work with through the charities are women who are older than me in age. They're in their 50s and 60s. And when I see them accomplishing things in their life, it motivates me to say that, okay, they're able to do this. So
Yes.
why am I sitting here complaining about something that I know I can do? I just need that push. And I use my charity work to push me
Yes.
forward, right? When you're working with the women that you're working with, what are maybe some of the obstacles that you see them struggle with when they're trying to find success in their life by whatever definition that they're using at that point in time?
Yeah, so look, mostly now at this stage of my life, I'm working mostly with midlife women who, especially women who are going through that menopausal journey, because that is also a time where women really lose confidence. And I can speak from personal experience there because my menopausal journey, thank God, I'll say is behind me now. I'm 58 years old. So thank God that is behind me. But when I went through it, it took me by surprise because it happened at age 45. So I wasn't ready. Because in my brain, you know, the stories we tell ourselves. And one of the stories I told myself was, oh, I don't have to deal with that till I'm in my 50s. Well, that was not what my body did. And so it came by surprise. The symptoms were severe. So there was brain fog, there was insomnia. So I wasn't sleeping. You know, I felt like I was a new mother. You know, when you have a baby, that you know, you don't sleep a lot. I was like, oh my God, I'm 45 years old, 46 years old, and I'm not sleeping. The insomnia was severe, the brain fog was severe, the sweats, all of the things that women go through. And it dented my confidence. Probably for the first time in a long time, it really slammed the confidence because I noticed that even at work, I was forgetting things. And I'm a super organized. I was in project management. I was hiring for huge information technology projects, running programs of work worth $200-300 million. So huge stuff. And suddenly I'm forgetting things. And so I started to lose confidence in my own ability in corporate. And I see that with a lot of women. The symptoms are so severe for a lot of women that it affects your performance, right? If you're not sleeping for a period of time, it's going to affect your performance. If you're suffering severe brain fog, it is going to affect your performance. And so often when I start working with women, I see them filled with doubt, filled with fear, filled with insecurity, you know, wondering how they're going to get their mojo back. And the thing is, you can't control what's happening in your body, right? And you don't know how long it's going to last. When you go through this menopausal phase, for me, it lasted 8 years, right? For some women, it's 10 years. For some women, it's 5 years. For some, it's only two, whatever. You know, God bless the ones that it only goes for 2 years. I wish I was them, right? um, but you don't know how long it's going to last. So you need to figure out ways to rebuild the confidence. And one of the things that I do go through with women, we discuss, is the change of career. Because one of the things you must reduce is the stress in your life at that time. Because you've got enough stress. Your body's going through all these changes. It's causing a lot of stress. And so often women start to make changes. That is actually when women start to question their careers and go, do I really want to do this anymore? Am I really happy doing this? Because if you're not happy doing what you do, and we don't get to be happy 100% of the time, that is not realistic life, right? You're always going to encounter challenges. But if you can be happy at least 80% of the time in your working day, that's a good target to aim for. And if you're not meeting that target, if you take an assessment of your career and go, you know what? I hate my job. I hate going to work on a Monday morning. I hate Monday mornings because that means the start of a new working week. If you are that woman and you are in that midlife stage, that is the time to start to assess life and go, well, what do I really want to do? That's where you start to look at your story, your skills, and say, well, what is going to bring me joy? Because when you work in a place where you're having joy most of the time, it is going to reduce your stress and your anxiety. And that's very, very important to do at midlife. So with the women that I see, my aim with them when I work with them is to help them identify how we, first of all, going to reduce your stress. What skills are we going to pull out of your achievements, your whole career history? What kind of companies? So I often make them identify at least top 10 or top 20 companies that they might want to work for. And then we put strategies in place to start targeting that. And that's quite a process, but that's where we start. What's going to result in the least stress for that woman?
Why do
Very,
you
very
think then,
important.
yeah, why do you think then so many women struggle from the, why do you, sorry, let me rephrase this. Why do you think the work that women do impacts their lives as much as you're detailing when it comes to trying to move forward in it from a healthy perspective then?
I think because, look, when you look at men, they don't go through that. They might go through other midlife changes, but their physical body doesn't, like women are losing estrogen. The moment the estrogen starts dropping, it affects your brain function. It affects other physical functions of the body. Sleep is one thing, and so I think there's there's the idea already that there's a physical impact that you can't control, that you can try to manage with things like HRT or other things. And some women can't take HRT. They've got history of cancers or things like that, so they can't take that. So they've got to find other ways to manage it. And the compounding of this physical stress, lack of sleep, brain fog, all of this contributes to a woman then really struggling with day-to-day life, day-to-day professional life, especially if she's in a very busy, high-powered role. And then the other thing is women are competing in environments where it is still quite male-dominated, right? No matter what they say, there is still gender pay gaps and things in the workplace. And most of the top positions are still held by men. So women are still fighting for their place. They're still fighting for equity. Now, we've come a long way since 50 years ago, but we aren't 100% there, right? We don't have 50-50 equity. That just doesn't exist. And so I think that's why it's difficult for women. And then women also have the other thing, we mothers, and we carry this mom guilt thing as well. So we don't put ourselves first on our priority list. We put the children and the partner and the whole family unit first. And so there's all of that impacts all these different decisions that we need to make. So it is a lot harder for women. And I remember when I was going through it feeling, my God, they're going to think I'm just incompetent. And I knew I wasn't. I had delivered many, many huge, high priority, CEO priority projects. So my history spoke for itself. But suddenly I hit this phase and I'm like, my brain is mush, and I'm just doubting myself and doubting my own abilities. And it takes something to climb out of that, and that's why, for me, I say it's important to identify what you're good at. So do you rebuild the confidence, but also to look at the overall health factor. Like, what do I need to do for my life at this stage that's going to have the least impact on my health? Because if we don't take care of our health, we don't have wealth for long. Health is wealth. It's an old saying, it's a cliche, but it's true. Without your health, even if you had all the money in the world, you can't stop what's happening. You talk to Steve Jobs about that. He would have given anything to stop the pancreatic cancer. He had all the money, one of the richest people at the time. And health is wealth. If you don't have your health, nothing else matters. You can accomplish very little, or your lifespan is very short.
I look
So
at my girlfriend as she struggles with finding a balance when it comes to work. She worked as she did work long, long hours when we first got together. And I always used to ask her, I was like, hey, you know what? You're always tired. You're feeling sick. You're feeling run down. You're feeling burnt out. Like, you don't need to be working 10, 11, 12, 13 hours at your job, because if something were to happen to you, there'd be people that would feel bad, but they would replace you because the company has to go forward, right? In a heartbeat. And one thing I shared with her is I was like, okay, let me test this Wendy a little bit, right? Let me test how much of a stranglehold it has on her, right? I said, if I were to win the lottery today, $100 million, we don't have to
Mm,
work ever again, right? I don't have to work, and you don't have to work because we're together. I was like, would you quit your job and we would just live life as millionaires? She was like, I was like, I would probably still work. And I'm like, why? I'm like, do you see your job has such a hold on you that even if you were rich, even if you were with someone that was rich, that we're planning to spend the rest of our lives together, you actually had to take a moment to think
mm,
if you would quit your job if you had access to $100 million. And you raise a good point where me as a man now, I'm gone.
mm.
Right? I give my 2 weeks.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm gone, right? And then she turns around, she's like, well, what if I won $100 million? Would you retire? I was like, yes. Why
Mm,
why wouldn't I? Like, why would you'd be at home doing what? Traveling without me? That doesn't make sense, right? But
mm.
because she's only known work, and
Yep.
it's so ingrained in her identity as a woman, as a person, she, at that point in time, this was last year, she couldn't see life without work, to your
Mm,
point, right? So if you had someone that came to that situation and they came to this, said, Wendy, I don't know who I am. I don't know what life looks like without work. How would you speak to them, or what advice would you give them at that point?
Well, for me, I have always tried to look for balance. Now, we don't get balance in life. I know people go for this work-life balance, and it's a kind of a phrase that people throw around, but it doesn't actually pan out in reality. We always sometimes, when things require it, we either putting a lot of time into private life, because say, for example, if someone's sick, if your parent is sick or your a sibling is sick, you may need to take time off to go and care for that person. So now suddenly the work is on the back burner, the family life, the personal life is a priority. The reverse is true. You could be delivering great projects, and to your girlfriend's case, she's working these long hours because she feels she has to. And one of the reasons that women do work so hard is because um, they've had to get even iota of the opportunities that are sometimes afforded to men. Or even in my case, as a biracial woman, had to work twice as hard to just get opportunities that were afforded to white people, right? So there's sometimes these factors that, and then what happens is, so if that starts happening at a very young age for you, I think it becomes ingrained in you, and it's your automatic way of being. And it's going to take a lot of reprogramming to undo the automatic way of being. I mean, because for me, when I needed to make that extra 20 grand, it was all about I've got to survive and take care of my daughter. But then I would look at the baby and I was like, but I also want to be a really good mom. So I went through, as I said, writing has always been the thing that helps me clarify and process things that I'm struggling with. So I would write in my journals and write out, well, how can I be a really good mom, but also be really good at my work? And that was when I started negotiating those interviews. But the person has to define that balance for themselves. They have to figure out why they're being driven by that. And there again, sometimes it's just a case of doing these personality tests. There's lots of them around on the internet you can do for free. But in some cases, if it's quite severe and the person is so driven by work that they can't actually create balance, they might need external help or an expert help in trying to figure out what is the motivating factor. Because usually when you're that driven, underneath it is a fear. There's a fear of something. And the fear could be the fear of poverty, right? If you grow up in dire poverty, you never want to go back there again, right? So for me, when I started out with my baby, I was in this rodent infested little apartment because that was all I could afford when I started out with her. I never want to go back there again, right? So sometimes when I work hard, it's because I have this image of that apartment and I'm like, never again, right? So I don't know what it is for your girlfriend, but that it could be, there could be something driving. There's a fear underneath it. Usually when we can't even pause and go, $100 million has landed in my lap, and you say things like, oh, I'm still going to work. I'm like, why? Right? What is the fear underneath it? In my case, I know if $100 million landed in my, I've been heavily involved in charity. That will become my work, right? I'll go, oh, gosh, I'm financially free now. I don't need to worry about earning an income. But I know that I don't want to sit around at home because that's not good for my mental health. I'm someone that needs to be engaged in life and engaged with people, talking to people. And so, which is one of the reasons I volunteer as well. I'll probably up the ante on the volunteering work so that I'm not someone that becomes idle, because I know that that has impact. Like I look at people around me, some of the older people, a lot of cases where people have dementia and things like that, they've become disengaged in life at quite a young age. And then it ends up having other repercussions on life. And so for me, I don't want to be that person that sits around at home and do nothing. I will travel a lot because travel is a big passion. But I will want to be engaged in the community with people. And probably I would end up taking on a bunch of charity and volunteering spaces to keep myself occupied. So I would say with your girlfriend, there's probably some fear that's driving that response, right? Maybe she's always had to work really hard. And so now it's like second nature. And the only way you undo second nature is to start practicing pulling away from it slowly. I mean, when I left corporate, I did it gradually. I wasn't a cold turkey. I'm leaving corporate now. I hate my job. I planned it out and I exited gradually, and that worked for me.
She's learning that now as we like the longer we're together, and she's starting to pull away and make sure that there's appropriate boundaries saying that, okay, I don't need to be working these long hours. I spoke to a few other women who were in a similar situation where they're working long hours. And I just asked them straight up, I was like, why do you think you need to do this? And it must have been 4 or 5 people. And each of them said that I was in a relationship where I relied on the other person and the other person disappointed me. I put me in a
Mm-hmm.
situation where I had to work hard to protect myself because when I relied on them, they disappointed and the lights got cut off.
Mm-hmm.
We started missing rent payments, mortgage payments. So all of a sudden, I was like, wow, it's not only your childhood experiences, but now it's like your adult experiences where it's like
Experiences.
you put yourself in a situation where you're relying on someone, the person disappoints you, and we've all been disappointed, right? But
Absolutely.
right, but it's a disappointment where this is your basic needs:
Yeah.
food, shelter. Do you see that with some of the women as well, where maybe some of the lack of confidence is their experiences of being disappointed by someone else?
Absolutely. And that was me too. Um, so I was on my own after my relationship ended for about 10 years. I refused to get into a relationship because I had worked 3 jobs to get that house with my partner, with my daughter's father. And then he walked away and left me stranded. He emptied out our bank accounts. He walked away. He left me with the $50,000 debt. And so the first 10 years, even though there were men approaching me and things like that, I refused to get into a relationship because I was like, oh no, no one's coming in my life and doing that to me again. And I have a kid. So absolutely no way. I was a hard no. But now I'm in a relationship that I've been in for 15 years now. So I met him when my daughter was about 10. Actually, I met him earlier than that. We became very good friends, and we built a really good friendship, and now we're in a romantic partnership. But in the end, we all have to give up our ghosts. Otherwise, they run your life for the rest of your life. But the other thing to remember is that there is something like, for me, when I look back at my thing, and I couldn't do it, I will say I couldn't do it when I was in it, or even when I came out of that relationship. It's now years later, I can look back and I can go, well, it wasn't all him. I, within my being, had issues that I had not addressed. And so I attracted this person that didn't treat me well. Right. And so for some of the women who are going through that, who have been disappointed, I do discuss. Now, I'm not a counselor, so I won't give, psychiatric advice or anything like that to them. I always tell them to go and get that help somewhere else. But I do share with them my own experience and say, I realized years later when I was reflecting that I did do a lot of blame game there with him, but I also had to look at myself, because what was it in me that attracted that? And so now, what do I need to work on? So when I started working on that, which was through that 10 years that I was alone, the next partner I attracted was a much better caliber of man who is 150% behind me. You've been corresponding with him because he runs all my marketing and my Peter, right? So this is my partner, but there's also my business partner. And I know that no matter what happens, because he's such a good person and he's such a generous person, that man has got my back. And I don't need to worry about what happened in the past. But we sometimes have to elevate ourselves to certain levels to be able to attract someone of equal footing, right? And it's not a good idea to put the past baggage onto the new partner. It happens, but we always need to be working to make sure that we keep that to a minimum, right? Because you a good person to your girlfriend, and the other women you've spoken to, if they've done work on themselves, they will attract someone that is there to support them, that's going to build a life with them, right? And that's important. So these are kind of conversations I have with women, and when I'm working with them in the career space, I'm like, well, what would you like to see in a partner? And so it's like, well, you don't want to go down to the bar down the street if you want a certain caliber of man. Right? Try to meet them in a work setting, have a look at their, and I'm not saying go for people that are rich or have high profiles, but go for a man that is working on himself, that's always trying to improve. That's what you need to look at, not down to the disco, someone who's always out in the nightclubs, who's always out in the bars. That should tell you something about what could potentially happen in a relationship. You might be at home with babies and the guy's out because they've been doing it all their life. But we
Always,
have to take responsibility for who we are as well, and what we have sorted and worked on in our own lives, because whatever's not worked on is going to draw something to it, right?
always found it strange how you'll have people, they'll find, they won't find success in a certain area, right? Like your point, right? Like you go down to the disco, to the bar, but they'll continue to try to find success in areas where they haven't found any success. Doesn't matter if it's 2 years, 3 years, 10 years. They'll say that, you know what, Terrain? There's that one. I was like, maybe, maybe
Mm.
there's that one, right? But how do you want to live your life? Do you want to live your life saying that, okay, out of the 1,000 people there, there's there's that one person I can find, or do you want to go somewhere where we can find 1,000 of 1,000,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
A very
People don't.
important, very,
Yeah, I was gonna say
very
people don't
important
seem to.
question.
Yeah, people don't seem to want to play the probabilities. And one thing that came up, because it ties back to the confidence, is that I remember I forgot where I saw this. It was an interview, And the young lady, well, I call everyone young lady, but she's older. I think she's probably in her mid 40s at that time. So this is a number of years ago. And she said something that I found strange at the time because this was before my training and everything, but it makes sense now, is that she said from her perspective, because she's had so many bad experiences either at work or in her romantic life, she's like, what if I'm not worthy of the type of love that I'm looking for? And I look back on that every once in a while I look back on that situation. I say to myself, that is no different than when someone says that I'm too old to find love. I'm
Mm,
too old to
mm,
find peace. Because some of the clients I work with who are in their 50s and 60s, they're like, Terrain, love is for people in their 20s. I'm like, what are you talking
no.
about? I'm like, love doesn't expire because that would mean that if you don't find it in your 20s, you're done.
Mm. That's right.
Right? Right? So, what
And
are your
how
thoughts on
sad would
that?
that be?
Hmm. So, what are your thoughts on that, Wendy?
Well, my good love came later in life, So I've been with my current partner for 15 years, and this is my person. Imagine if I'd closed off and go, well, I got that bad experience, and then became a single mom, and I'm not going to look for love anymore. Now, I did close off for a little while because I was very focused on paying back debt, developing in my career, and being that present mother to my daughter. And for me, it was like whoever's coming into my life has to be an asset, has to be a complementary asset. I'm not looking for liabilities. I'm not looking for someone who's going to make life harder for me, right? And so you become discerning. You become discerning. You look at a broad spectrum of people. You change your own game. You need to change your own game, right? Because if you have been looking in the nightclubs or in, as you say, the same places, and you're finding the same type of person and they're breaking your heart every time, then the problem is not them. The problem is you, right? If you keep going, it's like nothing changes if nothing changes. Another old cliche um, phrase. But nothing changes if nothing changes. If you're looking for love in all the wrong places, then you are going to be the person that ends up cynical and says love is for 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds, and I'm never going to have a shot at it. The thing is, if you walk around like the girl you mentioned saying, what if I'm not worthy of the kind of love I'm looking for? Well, there already in that statement, you have stacked the deck against yourself. Because if you don't believe that you're worthy of a great love, how are you ever going to attract that? That means the vibration that you're sending out is a lower vibration, right? And so you're going to attract a lower vibration back to you. But if you walk around like, you know what? I am worthy and I want someone worthwhile, you're going to eventually attract that kind of person. Vibration and energy always seeks its equal, right? And so it concerns me when I hear women say, I'm not worthy of that. Absolutely, you are. And if you think you're not, you've got some work to do, and go get to that work. Don't even go out looking for love. You shouldn't be out in the nightclubs or whatever. Don't go out looking for love. Do the work first so that you get to that point where you go, you know what? I deserve it. And he better be worthwhile. He better be worthwhile.
Yeah, it's always
Um,
concerning, especially when it's someone. I can understand maybe someone, well, it's bad either way, right? But you would say that, okay, if it's going to be someone who's going to think that way, you'd prefer it's someone who is very young, let's say in their early 20s, right? Versus
mm,
someone who's in their 40s or 50s, because usually at that age, you probably have been married already and you may have a child or two, usually, right?
usually, yep.
Usually. So if you're at that age now, 40s, 50s, and you're saying that, okay, love isn't for me anymore, love expires, I'm not worthy of love, and then you have your child who's like, oh my goodness, mom, dad,
Mm,
this is what you really believe, because you may not be saying it necessarily in front of them, but you're giving off to your point, right? Your energy
yep.
is doing that, right? So now, like you deal with women in who are midlife and around that age. Why do you? I'll ask you this: why do you think women, some women who are that age, have a different view of not only themselves when it comes to relationships, but relationships in general when it comes to the world and the success that maybe they could find in it.
Well, I think it goes back to how much life has beaten us down and how much we've done about life beating us down, right? Because none of us escape it. Everybody that I've not met one person, even, and I've met some wealthy people. I lived in LA for a while and met some filmmakers and all these things, right? Even those people that I had conversation with do not escape having a challenging time in life. Some people don't get many challenges, but they get at least one or two or three in their lifetime. And if you haven't done anything about how that challenge has made you feel, if you don't do any work to change that, then you will go through life feeling downtrodden, downbeaten, and you won't do anything to change your circumstances. But if you have the people that I've seen who've gone and taken responsibility, they go, you know what? Yes, life kicked my butt and I'm feeling really let down and all of these things. But what am I going to do to turn this around? The people who ask the question, what can I do to turn this around, are usually the people that turn it around, right? It comes down to attitude. It comes down to, are you going to ask yourself that all important question? Like, my father used to say when we were growing up, and this is in South Africa, he said, you're either going to become a victim of the environment and the circumstances, or you're going to become a victor, meaning you're going to be victorious. You only have two choices. And that, I believe, for me, that has been a very simple philosophy that has guided everything, you know. And there were times when I was a victim. There were times when I call it doona diving. I would dive under the doona, pull the doona over my head, cry my eyes out, and not want to have anything to do with the world, right? And that's allowed. All of us go through that. We're allowed to do it, but you shouldn't stay there. Do not stay under the doona, is what I always say to the people I work with. Don't stay under the doona. You're allowed to doona dive, but you have to come out at some point, and then you've got to figure out, you've got to ask yourself, now what do I do to turn this around? Because the moment you ask the question, I found from my own experience, it's like the brain goes into action mode. It starts to look for the little things that you can do to turn it around. And suddenly you come across a person who can help you, or you pick up a book and there's a passage that jumps out and you go, oh, you know, it has a profound effect. And the moment you ask the question, the brain starts to look for the answers. When you don't ask the question and you stay under the doona, well, you're going to get the same results.
So Wendy, let me ask you a final question as we close, right? I do this with a number of people. I want to give you three wishes,
Okay.
right? You have three. And with these three wishes, you can help people in any way possible. So, with these three wishes, what are three things that you'd want women or even men to know about themselves to make sure that they're living a healthier and more peaceful life?
Okay, so three wishes. I think the first one for me would be working on and wishing for good health. Because I've had health challenges through my life, and I've known that when my health is compromised, I'm not very effective. I'm not very effective in anything that I do. I'm too tired. You know, I've had times when I've ended up in hospital. So then you can't do anything. You're in a hospital bed, right? And we often take our health for granted um, until it is compromised in a way that stops us from doing what we need to do. So my first wish for myself and for every woman and also every man and every child is good health. That's one of, you know, if I had the Harry Potter Hogwarts wand, health is number one. The other one is to do something in life that is not all about you. Get out there in the world and find someone that you can wave a magic wand on, that you can give a wish to, that you can help, right? Big or small ways, doesn't matter. Because the moment we take the focus off ourselves, I don't know, I've always seen the world open up so much bigger. It's very easy to get caught up in our own selves and our own drama and our own pain and all of these things, but it never really helps you move forward. It's what I said earlier, go and help someone else. So take the wish and bless someone else with it as well. And then the other wish that I have for myself, and that I think is particularly important for most people, is go and see the world. I love traveling. I travel a lot. I take a trip or 2 trips every year. I've traveled all over the world. I'm just booked my trip to Europe. I'm going to UK and Europe in May for 6 weeks. And I do it because it broadens my mind. Meeting other people, eating different food, being in a different country, having to navigate the language barriers, all these things, it just opens up your world. And it also has shown me that things can be pretty small in my little world. And if I go into another country, especially countries where they don't speak English, where the main language is a different language to mine, then I'm using sign language, body language, every way to try and communicate. But what's beautiful about that is human beings can do it. I always manage, and people always manage to understand me, even if we're making signs. Communication is effective if you open to it being effective. So my wishes are about health, about spreading joy or giving someone, blessing someone with a wish, and traveling, going to see the world.